The rain had been falling for 36 hours straight. What started as a typical spring storm had evolved into something catastrophic, dumping more water on Charleston County, South Carolina, than the infrastructure could handle. Rivers overflowed, storm drains backed up. And by the time the sun should have risen on the third day, entire neighborhoods were submerged under 8 feet of rushing water. Officer David Martinez stood in the rescue boat, one hand gripping the rail as they navigated through what used to be Maple Street. Beside him, Luna, a 3-year-old golden retriever trained in water rescue, sat alert despite being soaked through. Her amber eyes scanned the flooded landscape with an intensity David had learned to respect over their 2 years together. "Command, this is Rescue 7, David spoke into his radio. "Oakwood subdivision is completely underwater. We've evacuated 43 residents so far. Moving to the next sector." The voice that crackled back was tight with exhaustion. "Copy that, 7. Be advised, mandatory evacuation was completed at 0600 hours. All remaining structures in your area should be clear. Proceed to Sector 9 for final sweep." David acknowledged and signaled to his boat operator, firefighter Margaret Chen, to continue. They moved slowly through the surreal landscape of rooftops and treetops jutting from brown water. Cars floated past like toys. A child's bicycle hung from a stop sign. The destruction was absolute. Luna shifted suddenly, her body going rigid. Her nose worked the air despite the overwhelming smell of floodwater, sewage, and diesel fuel from generators. David had seen this stance before. She detected something. "Luna, what is it?" he asked, though he knew she wouldn't answer in words. Her behavior would tell him everything. The dog moved to the edge of the boat, staring at a house about 50 yards ahead. Or rather, what used to be a house. Only the peak of its roof was visible above the waterline. According to the GPS coordinates, this was 247 Maple Street. According to the evacuation records David checked on his tablet, it had been cleared hours ago. The homeowner, listed as Margaret Chen, had been evacuated with other residents to the community center, but Luna wasn't convinced. She barked once, sharp and urgent, then before David could stop her, she jumped into the water. "Luna, no!" "Heel!" David shouted, but the dog was already swimming toward the submerged house with powerful strokes. David cursed under his breath. "Mike, follow that dog." Mike maneuvered the boat closer as Luna reached the structure. The dog circled it once, twice, her nose above water, clearly searching. Then she dove. David's heart stopped. Luna was trained for surface water rescue, not diving. The water here was contaminated, full of debris. If she got caught on something underwater, she surfaced 15 seconds later, still near the house, and barked again. This time it was different. Higher pitched. More insistent. David knew that bark. It was her alert signal. She'd found something. "Mike, this doesn't make sense," David said, pulling up the records again. "This house is marked clear. Resident was evacuated with the neighbors. Maybe the dog's confused?" Mike suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. "Luna doesn't get confused." David made a decision. He pulled on his dive gear, basic equipment they carried for exactly this kind of situation, though he'd hoped never to use it. "I'm going in. If she's this insistent, there's a reason." "David, Command said the house is empty. Command's records can be wrong." David secured his mask. "Luna's instincts can't." The water was murky, visibility barely 5 feet. David had to feel his way along the submerged house, using the walls as guides. He found a second-story window that had shattered, probably from the water pressure, and squeezed through. Inside was worse. Complete darkness. Floating furniture. The disorienting sense of being in a place that should be filled with air but was now an underwater tomb. He followed the hallway, his flashlight cutting weak beams through the brown water. Bedroom. Empty. Another bedroom. Clear. He was about to turn back when he saw it. A closed door at the end of the hall. The bathroom. David pushed through the water, reaching the door. It was locked from the inside. His pulse quickened. He braced himself and kicked hard. Once. Twice. The third time, the waterlogged wood gave way. The bathroom was an air pocket. The ceiling here was slightly higher, and somehow, miraculously, there was maybe 18 inches of breathable space at the very top of the room. And there, squeezed into the old-fashioned cast-iron bathtub, was an elderly woman. She was conscious but barely responsive. Her lips were blue, her skin gray. Advanced hypothermia. She stared at David with glazed eyes that seemed to look through him rather than at him. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Martinez. I'm here to help." "Can you hear me?" The woman didn't respond. She just trembled violently, her arms wrapped around herself. David could see she was wearing a nightgown and a thin robe. Nothing that would protect against hours in near-freezing water. "I'm going to get you out of here," David said, though he wasn't sure she understood. He keyed his radio, but the signal was dead this deep underwater. He was on his own. Getting her out was nightmarish. David had to support her weight while navigating back through the submerged hallway, out the window and up to the surface. Luna was there, circling, waiting. The dog's tail wagged once when she saw them emerge. Then she positioned herself next to the woman as David hauled her into the boat. "Jesus Christ," Mike breathed, already pulling emergency blankets from the supply box. "Command said this place was clear." "Get us to the nearest med station now," David ordered, beginning rapid assessment. The woman's pulse was dangerously slow. Core temperature probably in the low 80s. She was minutes from cardiac arrest. As Mike gunned the engine, David worked blankets, heat packs. Careful monitoring. He'd been trained for this, but theory and practice were different when the person in front of you was dying. "Stay with me," he urged. "You're safe now. Stay with me." The woman's eyes fluttered. Her lips moved. David leaned closer. "Tom," she whispered. "I'm waiting for Tom." 20 minutes later, at the emergency medical station, David watched as paramedics rushed the woman away. She was alive. Barely, but alive. He'd done everything right, but he knew the real hero was Luna, who now sat beside him, panting and still soaked. "You saved her life, girl," David said quietly, scratching behind her ears. "But how did you know?" "The house was supposed to be empty." A woman approached, running despite the no-running signs posted everywhere. She was in her 40s, hair pulled back, eyes red from crying. "That's my mother," she gasped. "That's Margaret Chen. Is she alive?" David stood. "Yes, critical but stable." "But I don't understand. The evacuation records show she was cleared from that address hours ago." The woman, who introduced herself as Linda Chen, shook her head, tears streaming. We evacuated her with us to the community center at 6 this morning. But she has Alzheimer's, advanced. She must have slipped away when we weren't looking. The doors weren't locked. There were hundreds of people. She must have walked back home. Walked? In this flood? The water wasn't that high yet when she would have left. Maybe 7 a.m. It rose so fast after that. Linda covered her face with her hands. "Oh God, she went home and locked herself in." "She does that sometimes. When she's scared, she hides in the bathtub. It's a dementia thing. Paranoia. We should have noticed she was gone sooner, but with all the chaos..." David felt a chill that had nothing to do with his wet clothes. Margaret had walked back into a flooding evacuation zone because her brain couldn't process the danger. She'd locked herself in the bathroom, probably terrified, as the water rose around her. And she'd nearly died there because everyone, including emergency services, believed she was already safe. "How did you find her?" Linda asked. "We told the command center as soon as we realized, but they said all the houses had been checked. They said there was no one left." David looked at Luna, who was now lying down, exhausted. My dog refused to believe them. Over the next few days, as floodwaters slowly receded and the full scale of the disaster became clear, Margaret Chen's story spread through the rescue community. The elderly woman who had nearly died in what everyone thought was an empty house. The search dog who had jumped into contaminated floodwater 7 times, refusing to give up until her handler listened. But one detail haunted David more than any other. He checked the records carefully afterward. Luna had never met Margaret Chen before the rescue. The dog had no prior scent article, no familiarity with the woman. So how had she detected a person submerged in a house underwater? Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a veterinary behaviorist who specialized in working dogs, came to interview David and examine Luna a week later. They met at the canine training facility, where Luna was being evaluated before returning to active duty. "What you're describing shouldn't be possible," Dr. Mitchell said. reviewing David's written report. Detection through that much water with no prior scent reference? The science doesn't support it. I know what I saw, David replied. Luna jumped in 7 times. 7. She would not stop until I went down there. Dr. Mitchell crouched beside Luna, examining her with professional interest. There are documented cases of dogs detecting people through rubble, through collapsed buildings. They're sensing multiple things. Scent particles traveling through air pockets. Sounds we can't hear, even carbon dioxide from breathing. But underwater detection, especially at that depth through contaminated floodwater, is it possible she detected vibrations? David suggested. Margaret was still breathing, still moving slightly. Could Luna have sensed that through the water? Possibly. Dogs are incredibly sensitive to vibration. Some researchers believe they can detect seismic activity before earthquakes. But detecting a specific human's breathing vibrations through 8 feet of murky water? Dr. Mitchell shook her head. That would require sensory capabilities beyond anything we've documented. Then, how did she know? Dr. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, watching Luna, who was now playing with a rope toy, completely oblivious to the scientific mystery she represented. I don't know, the behaviorist admitted. There's so much about working dogs we still don't understand. They've been documented finding people when it seems impossible, following logic we can't trace. Maybe it's a combination of factors we haven't identified yet. Or maybe what? Maybe there are some things dogs can sense that we simply don't have the tools to measure yet. Dr. Mitchell smiled. I'll include that in my report, though I'm sure the academic community will eat me alive for it. 3 months later, David and Luna were honored at a ceremony recognizing first responders who had served during the flood. Margaret Chen was there, recovered, and now living in a memory care facility where she couldn't wander away. She didn't remember the rescue. She didn't remember David or Luna or the hours she'd spent trapped in that bathtub as water rose around her. But when Linda brought her mother forward to meet Luna, something remarkable happened. Margaret, who usually showed no reaction to strangers, reached out and placed her hand gently on the dog's head. Luna sat perfectly still, accepting the touch with unusual patience. "Good dog," Margaret whispered. Her eyes, usually clouded with confusion, seemed clear for just a moment. "Such a good dog." Linda's eyes filled with tears. She doesn't usually connect with anyone anymore, but somehow she knows. David knelt beside them, watching the elderly woman and the dog who had saved her life. "Maybe some connections go deeper than memory," he said quietly. The scientific community never did reach a consensus on how Luna detected Margaret Chen that day. Some theorized she'd picked up stress hormones in the water. Others suggested electromagnetic sensing. A few proposed that Luna had simply been persistent about checking every structure, and the timing was coincidental. But David knew better. He'd seen Luna pass by dozens of empty houses without a second look. He'd watched her circle that one specific structure 7 times, diving again and again into dangerous water, refusing every command to stop. That wasn't coincidence. That wasn't random persistence. That was a dog who somehow knew a life was in danger, and refused to give up until that life was saved. How she knew might remain a mystery. But that she knew was undeniable. 6 months after the flood, new protocols were implemented for disaster evacuations in South Carolina. All residents in care facilities or with documented cognitive conditions were now fitted with tracking devices. Check-in procedures at evacuation centers were tightened, and every search and rescue team was reminded of a simple truth. If a trained dog insists something is wrong, listen to the dog, because sometimes the most advanced technology in a disaster zone isn't the sonar equipment or the thermal cameras. Sometimes it's a dedicated working dog with instincts that science can't fully explain. But experience has proven to trust. Luna continued working with David for 3 more years before retiring to live with him permanently. She received multiple awards and became something of a legend in the search and rescue community. But her greatest legacy wasn't the medals or the recognition. It was Margaret Chen, who lived 2 more years after the rescue, long enough to meet her first great-grandchild, who got to celebrate 1 more birthday, 1 more Christmas, 1 more chance to smile at her family even. If she couldn't always remember their names, all because a dog jumped into floodwater 7 times, knowing something everyone else had missed. All because a handler trusted his partner more than he trusted the records. All because sometimes The impossible is simply something we haven't learned to believe in yet.